Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name's Aiden Keller. I'm 17, and until a few weeks ago I was just the kid nobody noticed in a nowhere town in western Pennsylvania. If you pulled up a map and found Millfield, right between Latrobe and Johnstown, you'd think it was just hills, old train lines, and rusted steel dreams. And you'd be right. Not much happens here. Not since the factories closed down and the mines flooded. The most exciting thing for me this summer was getting a part-time job with the Millfield Municipal Water Authority. My Uncle Rick vouched for me. He's the maintenance supervisor, been working the pipes since before I was born. Every day we checked pump stations, pressure readings, occasionally pulled clogs from the old combined sewer lines that still ran beneath downtown. I thought it'd be boring, but I needed the money, and frankly, I liked working with Rick. He was one of the few adults who treated me like I had a brain in my head. I never thought I'd end up crawling through tunnels that hadn't been touched since the Carter administration, or that the end of our world would start there. It began 2 Fridays ago. We got a report from Public Works that one of the older storm overflow grates near the Susquehanna spill ditch was backing up. A couple homes on Ridge Street had sewage backing into their basements. Standard stuff for aging infrastructure. Rick picked me up in the department's Ford F-150, tossed me a pair of nitrile gloves and a respirator, and we drove out with a rigid sea snake camera system and a few cones. He was humming some old Billy Joel tune while I stared at the road, bored out of my mind. The entrance was behind an abandoned tool and die shop, Ridge Tool Works. Hadn't been open since 1998. Its windows were smashed in, and raccoons lived in the rafters. But the manhole out back was original to the 1930s WPA sewer expansion. The lid took both of us with a crowbar to lift, rusted solid. Rick muttered something about not remembering this hatch being on the map. Once we popped it, the smell hit us like a freight train. Not sewage, something stale, like mildew, chemical rot, and old blood. It wasn't right. Rick wrinkled his nose and muttered, "Something's dead down there." We dropped the camera cable. The feed showed the usual brick arch tunnel, some minor root intrusion, a few rats, but about 30 feet in, the tunnel narrowed unnaturally, almost like someone had built a secondary barrier inside. Beyond that, there was a sealed hatch. Heavy steel, bolted shut, welded along the seams. It wasn't on any of our municipal blueprints. Must be Cold War era, Rick muttered, scribbling a note. Maybe civil defense, or somebody's private project. I took a photo on my phone. There were faded warning signs on the hatch, the kind you only saw in old lab safety videos. Biohazard symbols. Rick, we should report this. He scratched his beard. We will, but let's take a look first, just a peek. That was Rick for you, curious to a fault. I should have said no, should have called it in, but I was 17, and I didn't want to look like a coward. So we went down. The air got worse the deeper we descended. We had lights, but even those seemed dimmer in that space, like the blackness was swallowing up the beam. The brickwork was dry, which was strange. This was supposed to be a storm line. We got to the barrier and Rick knocked on the steel with his mag light. That's solid, not cheap. Somebody with real money built this. There was an old airlock valve on the side. Rick spun it with effort. The welds cracked, old and brittle, and the hatch squealed open. The chamber beyond was unnatural. A round room, maybe 15 feet wide, lined with white plastic paneling. It looked like the inside of a clean lab, but aged. Mold had grown along the seams. Equipment was still in place. cylinders, lab fridges, broken glassware, all tagged with faded labels. A few had serial numbers and emblems from something called Centec Biologics. Neither of us had heard of it. And in the far corner, there was a collapsed containment pod, smashed from the inside. Vines and something like fungal threads had grown out of it, creeping along the floor like roots. Rick crouched near it. "This is no public works issue," he whispered. "This is private biotech, illegally dumping waste under a town sewer line." "Is that legal?" I asked, trying not to gag. My respirator wasn't filtering out everything. "No, and it sure as hell isn't safe." He pulled out his phone, took a video, then paused. "Look." Tiny spores drifted in the beam of his light, like dust motes, but heavier. "I think we should," I started, but Rick waved me off. "Let's grab some samples, then we'll call the EPA." He cracked open a dusty containment box and stuck a collection tube into one of the fungi threads. That's when the air changed. It was like the pressure in the room dropped. A deep thudding sound echoed through the floor, too rhythmic to be structural failure. Then a scraping sound from one of the side tunnels, ones we hadn't seen from the main sewer feed. Rick stood up slowly. "We're not alone." A figure stepped into the doorway, or what was left of one. The thing had once been human. Mostly, it still wore the remains of a hazmat suit, filthy and torn, but its eyes glowed faintly, and something pulsed beneath its neck, bulging, throbbing. Fungal tendrils crawled from its mouth. Its jaw hung loose, and when it saw us, it screamed, not from pain, but something primal, like fury. Rick shoved me back. "Run!" I tripped on a coil of tubing as Rick drew his utility multi-tool and swung it. The infected thing lunged, catching him in the side. There was a scuffle, wet and brutal. Rick stabbed it in the neck, then yanked me to my feet. We ran. Back up the ladder, through the hatch, sealing it as best we could behind us. By the time we got back to the truck, Rick was panting hard, his skin pale. "I'm calling this in," he muttered, fumbling with his phone. "EPA, CDC, whoever the hell needs to see this." But they didn't believe us. Over the weekend, Rick got sick. He told me not to come over. Said he'd filed a report. Monday morning, he didn't show up to work. Tuesday, his wife called. She found him collapsed in the garage. Breathing, but barely. EMS took him to Conemaugh Memorial Hospital in Johnstown. They said it was fungal pneumonia. Unusual strain. Contagious. By Wednesday, 2 more city workers, both who'd been at Ridge Street on a cleanup job, were hospitalized. The story hadn't broken yet, but I started seeing strange movement near the sewer lines. My friend Caleb lives 2 blocks from Ridge Street. He said his dog wouldn't stop barking at the storm drain near their alley. At first, I thought maybe it was raccoons or groundhogs. We get plenty of them near the wood line. But that night, I decided to bike over and see it myself. Caleb lives on Marsh Avenue, a row of post-war homes tucked between the old fire station and the tracks. His backyard backed right up against a cement drainage easement that fed into the Ridge Street interceptor line. I parked my bike by the chain-link fence and crossed into the alley. The street was quiet, no cars passing. The only sound was the occasional rustle of dry leaves in the gutter and the faint ticking of the overhead power lines. I crouched by the grate Caleb's dog had been barking at. It was one of the older models, cast iron. A wide storm drain with gaps big enough for my hand to fit through. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to peer inside. There were drag marks on the concrete, long streaks like something with claws or maybe fingers had scrambled out of there recently. The moisture around the grate had turned black, not mud, thicker with tiny strands. Fungal, almost like hair. I recognized it instantly. It was the same type of mycelium we'd seen in the sealed chamber. I backed away slowly. I didn't hear anything at first, but then a sound drifted up through the opening. A wet gurgling. Not water, not gas, breathing, ragged and animal-like. I left fast. The next morning, I went to the water department office early, hoping to find someone who'd believe me, but it was nearly empty. Only 2 of the supervisors were in, and they were arguing about a pressure drop at Pump Station 3 near the old tannery site. I tried to ask them about Rick. One of them, Mr. Ballinger, just gave me a tight-lipped nod and said, "He's in quarantine. Best you don't go asking questions." Quarantine. Not at home, not in ICU, not dead, just somewhere off the books. I'd checked every news site, even dug through state health advisories online, but there was nothing about a fungal outbreak. The only relevant piece I found was a 1-paragraph bulletin from the Pennsylvania Department of Health listing an isolated incident of respiratory illness linked to environmental exposure in Cambria County. No names, no locations. I started putting things together myself. Rick had collected spores. 2 others who entered the same area were infected. Then something, emerged from a storm grate on Ridge Street. Whatever was happening wasn't airborne, at least not in the general sense. It was local, contained, but not for long. By Thursday afternoon, Caleb called again. He sounded rattled. His dad, who worked nights as a janitor at the middle school, hadn't come home. His phone was off. His shift should have ended by 2 in the morning. Caleb said his mom was trying not to panic, but I could hear her voice in the background. She wasn't hiding it well. We rode our bikes over to the school. The building was locked, but I still had my master water key card from Rick's truck. It didn't open any classroom doors, but it got us access to the utility hallway behind the gymnasium. We found signs of movement almost immediately. A roll cart was knocked over, mops scattered across the floor. Near the boiler room, we found smears on the tile, brownish red, already dried. And then the smell hit us. It was the same chemical fungal rot I'd smelled near the hatch, stronger now, almost overpowering. Caleb turned pale and started gagging. I pushed him back and said I'd check the last room alone. Inside the janitor's supply closet, the air was thick and wet. Mold had begun spreading along the drywall, not green, but that same pale branching fungal growth, webbed and pulsing faintly. There was a tool belt on the floor and a pair of glasses bent at the frame. I didn't find his dad. But I heard movement in the ceiling. We left. I told Caleb we'd call it in anonymously, let the authorities handle it. For the truth was, I wasn't sure anyone would come. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. Just a photo. Grainy. Probably taken from a traffic cam or a dash cam. It showed 2 men in white hazmat suits loading a sealed steel container into the back of an unmarked white panel truck. The license plate had been blacked out. The location tag said Ridge Toolworks. I stared at that image for almost an hour. Someone was still going in, and they weren't local. On Friday, everything changed. The first 911 calls went out just after 2:30 a.m. A neighbor on Temple Street said they heard screaming in the storm drain behind their house. Not yelling, screaming. Raw, incoherent, like someone was being torn apart. Police responded, but within 15 minutes, both officers on scene had called for backup, claiming multiple aggressive individuals had emerged from the sewer access tunnel and were attacking anything that moved. By 3:15 a.m., scanner traffic had gone dark. At 5 a.m., the county sent in a rapid response containment team, not labeled CDC, not wearing normal hazmat gear. These guys were military. Unmarked fatigues, full-face respirators, suppressed carbines. I watched them from the roof of the public library 2 blocks away. They moved with precision. No warnings, no questions. Anyone who ran toward them was dropped instantly. The town didn't get an alert. No sirens. No lockdown notice, not even a boil water advisory, just silence. By dawn, I counted at least 4 bodies on the street outside the closed Sunoco station. 3 civilians and one of the containment team. The civilian bodies didn't look right. Their limbs were swollen, skin patchy and pale. One of them twitched every few seconds, even with half his torso missing. Whatever this was, it didn't kill like anything I'd ever seen. The team pulled back before full daylight. They loaded what bodies they could into the same white panel trucks. The rest they burned. From then on, the streets weren't safe. I went home, locked the doors. My mom had left 2 days ago to visit her sister in Altoona and hadn't come back. I tried calling, but service was spotty. My phone kept dropping bars and the messages didn't go through. The local news had gone offline, and the Pittsburgh stations weren't reporting anything west of Greensburg. I spent the whole day researching Centec Biologics. It took time. The company had dissolved over 10 years ago. Delaware registration, minimal public filings, but I found fragments, environmental fines for improper disposal of lab waste, a lawsuit from a whistleblower alleging human trials in unlicensed locations. One location listed, contract site D7 Western PA, facility beneath Ridge Toolworks, Millfield. That was our hatch. I couldn't sleep that night. Around 1 a.m., I heard something in the storm drain near my house. A scraping, wet sound, like flesh on concrete. I killed the lights and peeked through the blinds. Outside, the neighborhood was dead quiet. No wind, no traffic, no hum of late-night TV sets through the windows across the street. Just the faint buzz of a dying street lamp overhead and the rhythmic, sticky drag of something heavy and wet shifting beneath the curbside grate. I pressed my face closer to the glass, careful not to move the blinds. At first, I thought it was a raccoon, maybe a deer tangled in the storm channel. But then a pale hand reached up from inside the drain, feeling blindly around the edge of the curb like someone trying to remember what gravity meant. Fingers swollen and splayed unnaturally, skin mottled gray and veined with something black and stringy beneath the surface. Another hand appeared beside it, then a shoulder. The thing began to rise, awkward, shuddering, using its arms like stilts while its legs hung limp. It moved with no sense of balance, like a puppet with too few strings. When its head tilted up toward the light, I recognized the same milky, unblinking eyes I had seen in the figure by the Sunoco station. Its lower jaw sagged open unnaturally, jawbone visibly disconnected, and something wrong, flexed at the back of its throat. The tendrils, pale fungal strands pulsing outward with each breath, like a gill system that wasn't designed to be above ground. I ducked down and held my breath. It didn't see me. Or if it did, it didn't care. It staggered onto the street and stopped under the lamp, tilting its head in that unnatural, twitching way. I counted 5 more figures emerging from the grates. Some crawling, others already standing upright. They moved slowly, sniffing the air, pressing their palms against the asphalt in nearby houses. There was no urgency, no frenzy, just methodical, deliberate contact, as if they were testing the surface of the world they had come from beneath. I waited, heart pounding in my ears, until they vanished behind the row of houses on Maple Avenue. I didn't dare sleep after that. By morning, I found the trail they'd left behind. My neighbor's fence had been touched, 4 handprints, oily and ringed with that white, thread-like substance. I knocked on her door. No answer. She was in her 80s and rarely went out. Even before this started, the mailbox had another patch of mold growing just below the flag. It wasn't random, Every place they stopped, every surface they touched, it was spreading. I went back inside and opened my laptop, pulling up the old wastewater system overlays Rick had saved for me before he got sick. Every single old combined line from the town center converged beneath Ridge Tool Works. The sewers from the northern suburbs, from the industrial park, from the school, everything fed through that node. And that's where the infection had started. We hadn't just found an illegal lab. We'd found the seed of something buried in infrastructure. Something designed, or maybe allowed, to use the system we'd built to live in. I traced the path of the Ridge Interceptor to its terminus, the old bypass conduit near the Pine Creek culvert. That outlet had been sealed off since the mid-90s after a subsidence event made it unstable. But it wasn't destroyed, and it could still be accessed if you knew where to look. Someone did. Just after 10 a.m., I biked to the overlook near Old Mill Road and watched as two more white panel trucks, same kind I'd seen in the photo, drove toward the maintenance access lane near the culvert. No markings, no company names. Just small satellite dishes mounted on the roofs and strange emitters near the bumpers. I recognized the hiss of pressure locks opening as a rear hatch folded down. They were bringing something inside, not taking it out. That's when I realized this wasn't containment. It was continuation. Whatever they were trying to do down there, it hadn't stopped. I rode straight to Caleb's place. He didn't answer, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the house was silent. TV still on, static blaring. The living room looked like it had been left in a hurry. A glass of juice spilled across a notebook on the table, phone still charging by the wall. Upstairs, I found a broken picture frame on the floor outside his bedroom door. The carpet was wet. In the bathroom, the mirror had fogged with condensation even though no one had showered. There was a smear on the tile, like someone had coughed blood and tried to clean it up halfway. He was gone. Not just out, gone. I searched the house for signs of a struggle, checked every door, every window, no broken locks, no smashed glass, but the back screen door was open. I followed the footprints out through the dew-covered grass and into the alley. They ended at the storm drain. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Something in me just shut off. I knew I couldn't go to the police. There were no patrols now, and the station on Main had been dark since Tuesday. I couldn't contact the state. Every phone number I tried rerouted to voicemail or got hit with a dead signal. I thought about posting something online, Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, but our local network had been throttled. Pages wouldn't load. Even cell data was being redirected. By noon, drones started appearing over town. Not the kind you could buy at a hobby shop. Military-grade, quiet rotors, fixed cameras. I counted at least 5 in the first hour, all flying a slow grid pattern. Occasionally, one would hover near a home, beam a red light at the structure, then fly on. The houses with the red scan. People vanished from them the next day. Some began boarding up their windows. Others packed their cars and tried to leave, but every road out of Millfield was blocked. Construction zones, they said. Rockslide repair. EPA cleanup operations. All lies. The bridges on Route 30 were cut, intentionally. Someone wanted this town to stay quiet, invisible, self-contained. But people talk. I heard from Alex, the town's radio repair guy, over CB later that night. He was holed up near the old grain elevator scanning federal channels. He said the phrase biological vector suppression had come up more than once. Code words meant to sound technical, but we both knew what they meant. Something had breached, and now the government, or someone with their power, was suppressing it the only way they knew how, by letting the entire town become a testing ground. Alex told me about a possible safe zone northeast of town, past the tree line near the gas pipeline right-of-way. He said it used to be an old civil defense relay station, decommissioned in the 80s, but with a working diesel generator and possibly a landline connection still buried beneath it. If I could reach it, I might be able to transmit a signal out, something untraceable, something that didn't rely on cell towers or satellite links. I packed what I could: Rick's old respirator, a flashlight, my multi-tool, and a bottle of water purification tablets. I didn't know what was waiting out there, but I knew I couldn't stay in town any longer. Every hour that passed, more of the town slipped into silence. The neighborhoods felt hollow. There were no sirens, no barking dogs, not even birds in the trees. Just the occasional distant crack of something breaking, wood, glass, maybe bone, and the low, steady hum of the drones watching from above. I cut through the backyards between Marsh Avenue and the elementary school, keeping low and avoiding the main streets. Most of the homes I passed were dark, boarded up, or abandoned. At the edge of town, the fences began to show signs of hasty reinforcement. Planks nailed over chain link. Sheets of scrap metal screwed into windows. People were trying to defend themselves, but they didn't understand what they were up against. This wasn't an outbreak of disease, it was a colonization. A slow, methodical infestation moving beneath their feet, using our own infrastructure to reach every corner of the town. It was intelligent. Not in the way a person is, but in the way a fungus knows how to find a root system. It didn't need to run. It just had to spread. Just past the baseball fields, I crossed into the tree line and made my way toward the gas pipeline right-of-way. The tall grass there was knee-deep and brittle. Underfoot, the ground was uneven. Patches of subsidence where old mining tunnels ran beneath. I stayed between the white pipeline markers, moving parallel to the slope until I saw it, the outline of the old civil defense relay station. It was exactly as Alex had described, half buried in the hillside, overgrown with ivy and vines. The concrete structure had no windows and only a single rusted steel door, padlocked and layered in old no trespassing federal property warnings. I used Rick's bolt cutters to snap the lock and pulled the door open. Inside, the air was cold and dry, stale but not foul. The main chamber was a narrow corridor lined with conduit and metal cabinets, rows of analog equipment, rotary switches, and dusty meters. It had clearly been abandoned since the Cold War, but it still held the feel of something waiting to be turned back on. At the far end was the generator room. A small diesel unit stood in the corner, its tank still half full, maybe topped off during Y2K hysteria and never used. I primed the fuel line, crossed my fingers, and pulled the starter cord. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught. The hum was deep and reassuring, like the beating of a mechanical heart. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in a dull red glow. I flipped through the power switches one at a time, bringing the relay panels to life. Analog dials began twitching. Signal strength indicators rose from 0. Somewhere, deep in the wall, a relay clicked. The backup landline modem was still functional. I connected my laptop through the old military-grade TNC interface Rick had salvaged years ago for a ham radio project, and brought up a simple terminal. No browser, no social media, just raw data links. I tuned it to the frequency Alex had given me and began broadcasting. It wasn't a plea for help, it was a warning. Outbreak confirmed. Origin point: Millfield, Pennsylvania. Vector unknown. Symptoms: severe neurological degradation, fungal infestation, parasitic behavior. Transmission method: environmental contact. Sewer-borne proliferation. Do not enter affected zone. Quarantine breach probable. Government containment compromised. I repeated it every 90 seconds, alternating signal strength and modulation tones to avoid jamming. Then I waited. At first, nothing. But within 10 minutes, I got a response. Encrypted. High-frequency burst, barely legible. But I recognized the prefix. FEMA Priority Channel, East Region. Whoever it was didn't identify themselves, but their message was short and clear. Signal acknowledged, no extraction authorized. Repeat, no extraction, prevent further spread at all costs. They weren't coming to help. I shut down the transmitter. I spent that night inside the bunker, trying to sleep beneath the low thrum of the generator. I kept waking every hour, startled by phantom noises, scrapes in the ventilation shaft, the sound of footsteps that never got closer. I knew I had to make a choice. I could stay there indefinitely, hiding like a rat, slowly running out of food, water, and fuel, or I could go back to where it began. Back to Ridge Toolworks. The infection was spreading faster now. I had seen it with my own eyes. Mailboxes covered in spores, fences blooming with that ghostly mycelium. Every time one of the infected touched a surface, it grew. It wasn't just a threat to our town anymore. The fungus had learned how to move through plumbing systems, to send out threads along pipelines and conduits. There was no telling how far it had reached already. The only hope was to shut it down at the source. That sealed hatch we opened, that unauthorized lab chamber, wasn't just a site of illegal research. It was a vault. And we'd broken the seal. So I packed again. This time I took more. A crowbar, a hammer, my last bottle of bleach, and a 5-gallon jerry can filled from the generator's diesel tank. I wrapped it tight in an old backpack and began the hike back to town before dawn. Getting in through Ridge Toolworks wasn't easy. The southern side had been bulldozed, and the access route blocked by a county dump truck parked sideways across the alley. But I found a way through the back, an old cellar entrance I'd noticed the first time we'd come, now partially covered by debris. I slipped in and made my way to the old manhole chamber we had originally opened. The smell hit me before I even removed the cover. Rot, ammonia, and that now familiar earthy sweetness, like compost over corpses. I slipped down the ladder. The tunnel had changed. The brick walls were covered now, entirely overtaken by fungal bloom. Long, undulating sheets of pale growth shimmered with moisture. My boots squelched through layers of soft biomass. The chamber door was still there, ajar, the welds long torn apart. Inside, the white lab tiles were buried beneath a fleshy carpet of mold, with growths hanging from the ceiling like diseased stalactites. And in the center, where the collapsed containment pod had been, was a pulsing mass. It throbbed slowly, like it was breathing. Tubes of mycelium stretched outward in all directions, into the floor, the walls, the sewer tunnels beyond. It wasn't just living down here, it was controlling everything, directing it. The infected weren't mindless, they were connected. I set the pack down and began pouring the diesel across the floor. Every corner, every crack, I smashed open the few remaining canisters, mixing in whatever was left of the original chemicals. Something hissed in response. The fungal mass twitched. I lit the torch. The explosion wasn't cinematic. No fireball. Just a sudden pressure wave, a blinding flash of heat, and then choking black smoke. The tunnel shook. I ran, lungs burning, boots slipping, ears ringing. I scrambled out of the chamber and barely made it to the surface before the secondary blast blew out the manhole in a column of scorched spores. Flames licked through the concrete cracks. I watched as black smoke poured from every storm drain across the block. The infected, those nearby, convulsed and dropped, their bodies twitching in the street. Whatever network held them together had snapped. The fire burned for hours. I hid in a maintenance shed behind the ball field, watching the sky change color. No one came. No helicopters, no hazmat trucks. Just the silence of a town dying in slow motion. It's been 3 days since I lit the fire. The smoke has cleared, but I know it's not over. The network's broken, but the infection isn't gone. It's seeded too far, too deep. The spores are in the pipes, in the soil, in the air, maybe even in me. I still hear something in the drains at night. Something breathing. This town is lost, but someone has to remember what happened here. Someone has to know what was buried beneath Millfield. So I'm recording this, and if you're hearing it, if this broadcast reached you, don't look for me. Don't come here. Seal the roads, shut down the water lines, and burn the maps. Whatever we found in the sewer wasn't just an accident, it was waiting. And we let it out. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.